Hello and welcome to Analytics Nexus 2019, the premier virtual event for analytics best practice. This presentation is titled Becoming an Adobe Master, Attribution Best Practices, and will be presented by Stephanie Burton. This is just one webinar in a whole series of presentations you have access to beginning today. A few quick housekeeping items before I introduce this particular presentation. At any time, you can interact with this presenter or other presenters with questions or comments on Slack. The Slack address for Analytics Nexus is analyticsnexus.slack.com, and you should have received an email invitation to join if you registered in advance. If you didn't receive that email, you can find an invitation link to Slack in the menu below, as well as in the resource list. Once you log into the Analytics Nexus Slack, you can find the channel for Stephanie Burton to engage. Also, you can engage with us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @analytics_nexus. And finally, for questions on Analytics Nexus or Claravine, who is producing this event, feel free to email us at info@claravine.com. This presentation will be delivered by Stephanie Burton. Stephanie is a senior business consultant for Adobe, and she provides strategic guidance to clients on both Adobe Analytics and Audience Manager. With over 15 years of experience in digital analytics, including 7 years with Adobe and 8 years on the client side, Stephanie has worked with over 100 top name brands across all industries. She holds a Bachelor of Science from the Georgia Institute of Technology and a Master of Business Administration from the University of Georgia. I'll turn it over to Stephanie now.
By the end of this presentation, you should know about Attribution IQ, how to interpret the models, how to generate an attribution panel, and some basic tips and tricks for analysis. So let's dive right in. Attribution IQ is Adobe's newest feature that allows you to run up to 10 different models against your metrics. The models can be applied to freeform tables, visualizations, or even in calculated metrics. Typically, we think of attribution in terms of marketing channels, or in other words, at the dimension level, when really these models are more about creating new options for your metrics. This means that they can be applied to any dimension, EVAR or prop, so it's not limited to your marketing channels anymore. Previously, if you wanted to look at multiple attribution models, you would have to create several different variables, one maybe for a first touch, one for a last touch, and so on. The beauty of these models is that they are applied dynamically at the runtime of the report, so there are no implementation changes required. You don't have to use any additional variables or events. You can just change your attribution model on the fly. The only limitation is that the models are only available in Analysis Workspace. It does not extend to Report Builder, API, Data Warehouse, or any of those tools. All of the models contain two components, the model itself and the look-back window. We'll get into more detail on those later. This table shows a high-level definition of all models available. There's an extended version of this table online that has a little bit more detail and an example use case for each model. I'll include a link to those materials at the end of the deck. A few things to call out about these models. Data is applied to all touch points that exist within the look-back window. This means that there might be a none bucket, which is credited when no channel or dimension touch point occurred in that look-back window. Also, these models are normalized to 100%. So for example, if you're running a U-shaped model on your metric, but there was only one touch point, then that touch point would get the full 100% rather than just a 40%. The Attribution Panel is a really cool feature that launched with the new models. It's basically a quick and easy way to run several models against a dimension at once, that you can conduct exploratory analysis across the data without having to do the manual labor of setting up each individual model and visualization. The steps for building the panel are really straightforward as described on this slide. You just pull in from the left panel menu, the attribution, and then select your metric, dimension, models, and your look back window. Let's jump into Analysis Workspace and go into this in more detail. As I mentioned in the last slide, building an attribution panel is very simple. You just go over here to the very far left menu, select your panels, select Attribution Panel, click and drag, and it will come up with the options for you to select your metric, channel, and attribution models. A few things to note: not all dimensions are supported with Attribution IQ, specifically list vars, reserved list vars, and A4T dimensions. There are also several metrics that are not supported because it wouldn't make sense to apply an attribution model to them. Things like unique visitors, visits, page views, and so on. There's a full list on the FAQ page that I'll link to at the end of the deck. So let's go ahead and pull in the details of our model. We'll pull in orders metric against the marketing channel, and then select our models. You might notice a difference in your data when running a linear model. So the way linear model attribution was calculated has shifted slightly with the release of Attribution IQ in July of 2018. Historically, the linear attribution was calculated after the first touch or last touch persistence. So as a result, your dimension values would receive a different amount of credit based on if it was first touch settings, last touch settings, or crop settings. After the July release, the linear calculation was updated. So instead of using the persisted values, now we only look at the values that are passed in on each hit of the visit. The dimension allocation settings no longer impact the way that that linear allocation is adjusted. So here we'll select our models, our look back window, and build. Gone ahead and built out the same panel over here so that we don't have to wait for all the reports to finish rendering. Now keep in mind that this is only a sample set of data in a training report suite, so take the numbers with a grain of salt as we walk through it. Hopefully, if you are an Adobe client, then this is not brand new to you. I'm not going to go into too much depth on each area of the reporting, but I just wanted to cover a few highlights and tips. As you can see, the Attribution Panel automatically creates these compelling visualizations. You have your callout summary number here with your total orders that you're working with, followed by a basic histogram comparing each channel across the models that you've selected. If you scroll down, you'll see some other valuable tools here. The Venn diagram gives you an interesting viewpoint. It defaults to the top 3 channels from the raw data table above, which of course you can update to the ones that you prefer to see just by highlighting and selecting. But this shows you how the channels work together at getting orders through. So for example, if I highlight in this middle section, you'll see that 1,885 orders came from these 3 channels working together. The next table, or the next part, shows you how often customers have multiple touch points. It does not include the 0 to 1 touch point by default because so many dimensions would have a huge allotment of 0 to 1 touch points that it would skew the graph. So as a result, product took it out by default, but if you don't want to discount that, you can certainly update your graph settings here by clicking on the little gear icon. And you should be able to adjust that starting point. There we go. Starting bucket, you can change that down to 0. Okay, the trended channel performance, I just made a quick update to mine because by default, it comes through based on the percentage value, so it all rounds up to 100% stacked. To me, that's not the best visual, so I update mine by clicking on the gear icon and deselecting the 100% stacked. Just a little tip. The scatter plot is really cool. So this is just a quick way to see how one channel might attribute more than another. So for example, any of the bubbles that deviate off of this 45-degree angle, it's due to one attribution allocating more than the other. It's a little tough to see here with this data set, but let's say, for example, that this blue bubble was higher on the vertical. That would be telling you that for natural search, it gets more orders attributed to it using the last touch attribution than it does with first touch. Again, if that were a little bit further up. And then, of course, we have the flow. This is similar to a page flow, but instead of seeing how users are navigating across the pages, we see how they're navigating across the different channels. You could, of course, expand each channel as you desire by just clicking on that branch, and it'll move out to the next step. This second attribution panel was built the same way, just using a different dimension and metric, just to pull away from the typical marketing channel use case that is so common. This one is looking at internal promotions against revenue. Here you'll see how the default trended view comes in stacked to 100%, and then also a lot more deviation in the scatter plot that I mentioned above. Now you may have noticed that with the release of Attribution IQ came two new variables, your marketing channel and your marketing channel detail, in addition to your standard last touch and first touch variables. The marketing channel is essentially the same as your last touch channel dimension. It follows the same default settings. However, you might find that when comparing the two, you see different data, perhaps a none row line item on the marketing channel, especially when you update your orders metric to try and match the same attribution as your orders for last touch channel. This is because the Attribution IQ metric has no knowledge of the processing rules or the override settings of your marketing channels. Because remember, it's only reporting on what's returned, not the raw data itself. The shorter the look back window of your panel, the larger that discrepancy might be, and the larger that none bucket might be. Because again, if a touch point falls outside of that window, then it gets put into the none bucket. So how do we fix this? Well, the best thing I can offer you that I've found to be useful is to expand the date range of your panel. The farther back you go, the more accurate your look back data is going to be applied. So 12 months, 24 months, as much accurate data as you can get. You want to pull all that in. And then to isolate to the time range that you really want your reporting for, just pull in a segment on top of your table for that time range, or a filter. And ideally, that none bucket would minimize considerably or even go away altogether. Sometimes when looking at these models, things might look different than expected. Models are about instances on hits where that dimension is set. So as a result, it can get hairy when you have a dimension set on every hit, or better yet, a dimension with first touch settings that's set on every hit. So it's important to have a technical understanding of when and where your data is set. A few reports in here can help provide that visual, such as this Venn diagram. This is looking at all page views versus page views with a particular instance. The larger the overlap could mean that the value is set too frequently and lead to fragmentation of your model. A simple histogram based on hit depth or visit number can also be useful in understanding where your instances are likely to occur for a dimension. For example, internal search term instances may be more likely to occur deeper within a visit than other dimensions, which would affect your models and might even affect which model you choose to run against that value. Another example where you might see values pop up that you wouldn't normally see in your reporting is if you were to run a custom model on an entry-based dimension. So just be aware of what your dimension settings are, and then also where those dimensions are set within the visit. Another useful tip is to run the two different attribution models side by side. So the same models, but with the different look-back window. This will give you just a way to quickly identify differences between those two look-back windows. Okay. One of the cool features about Attribution IQ is the ability to quickly compare models in a table. So here I just have my marketing channel table, and this time I'm looking at registrations. By right-clicking on the metric and come down and say compare attribution models, and it gives me the little prompt that you should be familiar with by now, where I can select which model I want to compare. Say I'll compare the U-shaped model with a visitor look-back window. So once I apply this, it's going to pull in a new table or a new column with that additional attribution model, and it's also going to populate the percent change between the two models. You can also apply different models at the breakdown level. So here I have my marketing channels. So let's say, for example, I want to break down email service by the actual tracking code. I can then change just the attribution model for those tracking codes and say, maybe I want to know how registrations are attributed using last touch. Apply. It's all hidden in the right-click functionality. This is also where you would edit any other metric that you pull into a free-form table that you want to adjust attribution on. You just click on the little gear icon. It'll bring up this column settings tab, and then you go down here to the data settings and select use non-default attribution model. Because I already have one applied, I just have the option to edit. And again, it comes up with that attribution model prompt. Let me quickly show you how to create a calculated metric using the different models as well, just in case it's new to you. So here I'm going to go add a new metric, and I'm going to pull in the base metric, orders. And again, using that gear icon, I can change the allocation or the attribution by selecting the use non-defaults and then deciding which one I want. Let's say first touch. And apply. Now I can actually expand on this and say, maybe I want more than just the first touch. Maybe I want to see the difference between first touch and last touch. So you can pull in multiple models within the same calculated metric. And then you would save it that way. Let's jump back to the slide deck to wrap it up. Most of these tips and tricks will include what we just reviewed in the demo. However, I wanted to call them out in these slides for review in case you find them helpful to document or reference during your own analysis and exploration. So attribution models are run on the data that's returned in the reporting, not the raw data. This leads to some limitations and compatibility with the other applications. And it also could lead to some issues like we discussed on comparing the last touch dimension versus the new marketing channels dimension. The model has no knowledge of processing rules or override information that's in your settings. So you have to be very cognizant of how this plays into your look-back window as well. Calculations are based on instances when a data point is sent to Adobe. So persistence doesn't matter anymore. And thus, to the next point, props are evaluated like EVARs for custom models. The models are really good for dimensions that are set on interactions. So things like I looked at a product, I did a search, I went to a URL, and so on. Some common metrics are not available for custom attribution, and a couple dimensions as well. We mentioned a few of those in the demo, but we'll include a link to the online documentation for the full list. The panel is best used for exploring the differences across the models. The power is in the comparison. This tool is not meant to help customers identify which model makes them look best and then use that one for all the things. It's really meant as a tool for exploration and comparison. There may be some business units that standardize against one model versus another based on their objectives, and that's totally fine. It only has rules-based models for now. No algorithmic modeling is in place. With the launch came 2 new dimension labels, the marketing channel and marketing channel detail. We touched on this during the demo. It can add confusion, so keep that in mind. The visitor look-back window includes full months. I don't think we went into detail on this one too much, but just be aware that the dates are adjusted in the look-back window to include the full month. So if you're running a panel on March 5th through the 31st, the look-back window would actually include March 1st through the 31st of data. The biggest tip that I can give you is that some technical knowledge is required for running your attribution models. As you saw in some of the examples in the demo, it's really important to understand when and where each dimension is set. If the value is a first touch dimension and set on every hit, then the data can get fragmented in some of the models. So take caution, especially with those dimensions that are set on every hit or the dimensions that have first touch allocation settings, because it can just get really messy trying to find the value in those models. In some cases where most visitors have either 0 or 1 touch point, there will be very minimal difference between the models. So keep that in mind. And lastly, when using your segments, and I don't think we really went into segments during the demo, but this is just good to keep in the back of your mind. It's best to use them at or above the level of your model. So for example, if you're running a visit-based model, you should only use visit or visitor level segments within it. If you're running a visitor-based model, stick to the visitor-based segments and try to avoid those hit-based segments. Lastly, here are some links to the product documentation on Attribution IQ, as well as some online training videos. I hope that you found this information and the tips to be valuable. Please feel free to reach out to me via the Slack channel if you have any follow-up questions.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was a really interesting presentation. And just a reminder to our guests, you can engage with Stephanie Burton directly via the Analytics Nexus Slack channel. Once you log in, you'll find her channel there on the left. In addition, if you're wondering how to get to the links that she just offered, we'll include those in the resource list here as well. Thank you, and enjoy the next presentation.